in 2026 and beyond. Well, I'm here to give you the status update on what is happening with Israel's military and strategic diplomacy. Uh, if you look at the big picture, Israel has said that it is not only going to invest about $110 billion over the next decade to build up its own military infrastructure so that it is not reliant necessarily on US platforms, so that it will be free to make its own and capable of making its own weapons as necessary to combat terror and to fend off any nation states that might want to attack it. So that obviously has been reported some weeks ago, and I brought you the information here about what that would mean and the various scenarios that we might see and why Israel might be making that move. This was before Trump went to Mar-a-Lago. The big announcement was made by Bibi back in late December, right before he flew to Mar-a-Lago. He said that Israel intends to invest about 110 or 111 billion dollars worth of shekels, obviously, to shore up and build up really Israel's military capabilities in terms of industrial production to be able to produce the weapons necessary. But on top of that, we now have a great debate among the generals in Israel about whether or not they should spend another $350 billion over the next decade, which is a bit more than $100 billion, to buy more F-35s or F-15Is. And the decision so far is to buy some of both. And the reason for that, you might think, well, why wouldn't they just get more F-35s, since those are obviously advanced, the latest available airplanes that Israel can get, the most high-tech airplanes that Israel can get, and Israel installs its own avionics with its own AI, and it's obviously world-class, world-leading technology that no other nation in the F-35 program is allowed to even do, obviously except for the U.S., which can do whatever it wants as the leader of the project. But Israel has special permission, basically, to create and install its own tech into those planes. And that tech has proven to be extremely effective in what we've seen in Operation Rising Lion, when we had the 12-day war against Iran, and Israel's F-35s did a remarkable job of hitting targets. But also the F-15I, which is the Israeli version, right? It's the Israeli variant, the F-15I, which is an old workhorse in the Israeli Air Force. It's several decades old, but it is an extremely reliable long-haul plane that has the capability of carrying significant amounts of ordnance to hit targets very far away, with a need for less refueling than the F-35s. And also it gets its intelligence from other stealth aircraft and drones and other forms of intel, satellite, etc. So it's not like the F-15 is somehow, a bad aircraft by any means for Israel's needs. But that's something that the top generals in the Air Force in Israel and in general in military, terms, the General Command Staff is in the middle of debating right now. So far, like I said, the decision is for Israel to buy some of both, right? Some F-15Is and some F-35s. So that is the current status update on the military development and strategic plans for 2026 and over the next 10 years. And that's where we're heading with that overall. When it comes to Israel's diplomacy, we see Israel continuing to advance its diplomatic efforts with Syria, even though Syria has basically been kind of putting a damper on the whole project with the various actions they've taken, attacking Druze in Aleppo multiple times now. In fact, they're kind of in the middle of a fight right now that's been going on all week. And some of the Druze in Aleppo have had to flee for their own safety. Others are fighting against the Syrian armed forces, which are basically al-Jilani's terrorists or al-Shara's terrorists, who, I remind you, about a year ago, just before the Syrian government at that time under Assad fell, those same terrorists were ISIS, right? Okay, yes, they were going by another name, HTS or whatever, but they're basically ISIS terrorists. Don't forget that. They're Sunni extremist ideologists who want to kill anybody who's not a Sunni extremist like them. And this makes the situation complicated because Israel wants very much to have an official end to the war with Syria. But if Syria keeps doing what they're doing, it's going to make it very difficult to officially end the war with Israel when they keep attacking allies of Israel inside Syria, namely the Druze, but also Kurds and other people, even, Alawites who are now the minority, who used to be, the minority that was in charge of the country, but they are now a very persecuted minority. And the Christians, of course, in Syria, who are allies of Israel, for the, in large part, who are being persecuted, again, by the powers that be. And when I say they're allies of Israel, I don't mean that they are staunchly Zionist or anything like that, but they very much want the protection that Israel provides for the Druze in the south, near Sueda, and obviously near the Israeli-Golan border. Hello there, I see your message. What does it say? Active theater in Asia 2027. I'll discuss the theater in Asia in another video if you want, about Taiwan and China, etc. But it's a very good point, and you can see I've made recent videos about that particular topic. Israel also is advancing its goals of diplomacy, reaching agreements with more Muslim nations like Indonesia, which was one of the signatories of the Trump 20-point plan, and is making efforts to that end. Obviously, it's happening behind the scenes, as it should. Right? Diplomatic efforts generally are best left to behind the scenes, because when they are all publicly aired constantly, they tend to fail. And they also tend to give reason to terrorists to attack Israel, which is exactly what happened on October 7th, when the Hamas knew that their time limit was running out very, very quickly. And if Saudi Arabia had signed a peace deal with Israel before Hamas attacked Israel, it would basically spell the end for Hamas. They knew that, and so they took advantage of that, because Israel and Saudi Arabia had both said publicly that they were very close to signing a deal. And by the way, Sudan is also another one of those countries which is on that list of countries making great efforts to reach peace with Israel. They have already sort of normalized relations. The president of Sudan has, in fact, visited Israel. This was before October 7th, 2023. And there was a peace deal expected to be signed later in 2023 or early in 2024, but it was delayed because of the attacks of October 7th. And now Sudan is not necessarily on the fence more, but is having to take a wait and see approach because, of course, they are a Muslim majority country. And so they want to see some kind of progress on the Israel-Palestine issue, just like the government in Saudi Arabia has said that they would have to do. What's this say? All the green and pink-haired confused people will be drafted. Sad, but ironic. Yeah, I don't think that they're going to draft anybody in the U.S. anytime soon. The U.S. military is incredibly strong. And in fact, Trump's budget projections for the U.S. military are to increase from over $1 trillion where they are today per year on defense or war, because now it's called the Department of War, to $1.5 trillion per year by 2027, which is just next year, which means we're likely to see it reach $1.25 billion or $1.25 trillion, or even $1.3 trillion this year, and then jump to $1.5 trillion next year. And I figure by the time he leaves office, it will probably be somewhere in the area of, $1.6, $1.7 trillion per year, which is an insane amount of money to spend on war or defense or both. But on the other hand, the challenges the U.S. faces kind of justify that, especially when you look at China and Taiwan and other areas of conflict, right? So let's not get it twisted. The U.S. is by far spending more money than any other nation on earth, even more than the top 10 nations on earth behind the U.S. combined. But that does not mean that it's an unjustified expense, because those threats are very real. And also what's happening in the Middle East is very real. And if we don't see an end to the Iranian dictatorship, and we see continued advancement of Iran's terrorist sponsorship and terrorist behavior at home, it very well could just be, an extremely wise thing to spend that money to make sure that these nations do not pose a significant threat to the United States or to its allies across NATO, across obviously Israel and other nations around the world, even including places like Nigeria, or where there are lots of Christians being assaulted and massacred by the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands, being killed by Boko Haram and other extremist Islamist groups, like including Islamic State in Nigeria. So it is certainly a justifiable expense from the way that it seems at the moment, but it is a huge amount of money. Let's not get it twisted. That is going to have an impact on the U.S.'s economy. So when you think about the $4 billion kind of discount on products that America offers Israel every year, or the $3 billion or whatever it is, and Israel is building up its own infrastructure in order to not need that, and already doesn't need that, but in order to really officially say, hey, thanks, but no thanks. The amount of money that the U.S. credits Israel every year in exchange for Israel buying American military devices, products, is really negligible. It is a token, symbolic, political thing for political leverage over Israel. And Israel, frankly, doesn't need it and doesn't want it. And we can still be great allies and great friends, but we don't need to receive the $3 billion a year in a country whose, annual economy is more than $500 billion a year. Yes, it's not a multi-trillion-dollar economy or anything like that, but, and billions of dollars are, make a difference, but it's a very small difference. We're talking, far less than 1% of Israel's economy is what the United States provides in military discounts on products. And again, those military discounts on products benefit the U.S. directly by, first of all, ensuring U.S. jobs, by buying American products made in American companies in the United States, and by buying products that the U.S. cannot purchase by itself. But again, back to the diplomatic front. What else is happening? Well, Samoa, that's right, the tiny little island nation of Samoa has announced that it is going to open an embassy in Jerusalem. Right? Until now, they've had their embassy in Tel Aviv, like many nations have, even most, pretty much all, except the U.S. and a couple of others that have moved it to Jerusalem since the U.S. did. And the reason for that is because Samoa and Israel have long been allies and friends and had peace. And we've had diplomatic relations, in fact, since 1972. And part of the reason for that is because obviously we share a lot of core values, because Samoa is largely a Christian country, right? And their forefathers have adopted the God of Israel as their own, and they see the value in having diplomatic ties with Israel. And therefore, they're going to open their embassy here in Jerusalem, finally, which is a massive recognition and a huge win for Israel's diplomacy. It may not seem like much, because like Samoa is a tiny country, and you might think, oh, that meant it's meaningless. But it's not meaningless, okay? Every little win changes the game. And the more we see countries like Samoa and other countries opening embassies in Jerusalem, the better it is for Israel's diplomatic standing in the world. And the better off Israel is in terms of its geopolitical situation. So that is the current update for you on what Israel is doing diplomatically and militarily this year and over the coming decade. There are, in fact, a lot more things happening diplomatically, but in order to just keep this video not too long, because I literally could go on for hours about what they're doing with behind the scenes information that we know about, we'll cut it off here and wish you all well and peace and shalom. And yeah, I wish you nothing but the best. Again, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Help me get the word out to more people. Because as you can see, my prognostications about politics and geopolitics and military operations and other things in that world are extremely accurate, not by accident, given my experience and knowledge and understanding about this material. That's why I bring it to you, because I believe a better informed world is good for humanity. I believe it's important for us to know more, and it's important for Israel to be a light unto the nations. And I'm doing my part in this way, as well as other ways. So, hope to see you in the next one. Peace and love. Shalom for now.